Take one slow breath with me. I'm Joe, and you've done enough for today. From here on, you don't have to chase sleep anymore. Just listen. Let the rain fill the quiet spaces. Let these true crime stories gently occupy your thoughts, and let the night do the rest. There are only a few ads in the first 10 minutes, then nothing to interrupt your rest for hours. If this little escape helps you unwind, I'd love it if you subscribed and left a like. Tell me where you're resting tonight. Now, let's begin. Case 1. Johnny Douglas is one of the most iconic names in crime. An early criminal profiler, Douglas's work with the FBI marked the first attempt to understand the habitual killer's mind. Netflix's smash 2017 show Mindhunter was based on Douglas's memoir of the same name. Coming face to face with some of the United States' most deranged killers and criminals, Douglas formulated the language, the procedures, and the very investigative structure that is vital to the pursuit of each killer. So when we heard Douglas and his longtime collaborator, Mark Olshaker, would be digging into his historical caseload for a brand new book, we knew it would be a must-read for lovers of true crime. The Killer. Across the table puts 4 of Douglas's most terrifying cases under the magnifying glass, many of which will be new even to true crime buffs. The book will be published on May 7th, 2019. But we've got an exclusive sneak peek today, just for readers of the lineup. In this excerpt, Douglas digs into one of the most deadly and least understood types of serial killers. These are the brutal killers who like to play God, taking advantage of the elderly and weak to decide who lives and who dies. A lot of people are surprised to discover that the most successful and numerically devastating serial killers are not the Jack the Rippers, who stalk their victims by night, or even the Ted Bundys, who charm, entice, then abduct, assault, and kill beautiful young women. Actually, and ironically, they are workers in one of the most sacred helping professions. People who don't even bother to hide their identities or their faces from unsuspecting victims or their families. And in many cases, it takes years before authorities even realize a crime has been committed. So the case is cold. Donald Harvey, a mild-mannered man from Ohio with a ready smile, a sunny disposition, and an endearing manner, may be the most prolific serial killer in American history. Between 1970 and 1987, he may have killed as many as 87 people, all while hiding in plain sight. His preferential victims, elderly men and women in hospitals, who could not resist or fight back. By the time he was captured and brought to justice, he had proudly embraced the moniker Angel of Death. When Harvey was finally apprehended and interrogated, I was asked to observe the interrogation and provide on-site consultation as to how to get him to confess. As it turned out, though, Harvey spoke freely to the FBI agents questioning him. The interrogators were interested in his motivation so they could help put together a coherent case for trial. I was interested not just in his motivation, but also in his actual behavior before, during, and after each crime. How and why did Harvey become the person he was? How did he learn to kill so efficiently? And what factors went into his going undetected for so long? Was he born with homicidal impulses, or were they the result of a dysfunctional upbringing that demanded some form of displaced retaliation or retribution? What could have been done to stop him, and what can now be done to keep crimes such as his from happening again? This was what I hoped to get out of the interview. If Donald Harvey was a one-off type of predator, he would be interesting and grotesque, but not necessarily significant from an investigative perspective. Unfortunately, He is the prime propagator of a type of murder that has its own category in the crime classification manual, medical murder. Every serial killer is horrible and terrifying in his own unique way. But on a certain level, what Donald Harvey did was particularly despicable because he played on trust. Moreover, he perverted one of our most cherished values, the mission to heal and comfort the sick. These may not be the types of criminals that thriller movies are made about. We may not think of the Donald Harveys as being dangerous in the same way we would a Ted Bundy, a Charles Manson, or a John Wayne Gacy. But that would be a mistake. Most of us, fortunately, will never encounter that type. But just because the Harveys don't lurk in the shadows, waiting to pounce on unsuspecting victims going about their daily lives, doesn't mean they are not as dangerous. Their victims are often the same as the more traditional serial killers, the elderly and defenseless. We think of young, beautiful women as the targets of these men, but vulnerability, more than anything else, is likely to lead to someone's becoming a victim. That's why children, senior citizens, prostitutes, drug addicts, the homeless, and other marginalized groups are prime targets of serial killers. Individually, as we've said, the Harvey kind of predator can be a lot more productive as serial killers. Almost all of us at some point will find ourselves in a healthcare setting, either for ourselves or a family member. For most of us, hospitals are pretty scary places to begin with. Even in the case of routine procedures, we can never be certain of the outcome. If we get to the point where we feel we can't trust the man or woman behind the surgical mask or the nurse's badge, then the hospital becomes the stuff of nightmares or horror movies. When I think of times when I've been hospitalized, it never occurred to me that a crossword uttered in pain or frustration to a nurse could result in that person's deciding to kill me. Or when I was comatose in Swedish hospital in Seattle after suffering viral encephalitis while hunting the Green River Killer in December 1983. What if some nurse or orderly playing God decided to put me out of my misery? Anyone could be the next victim. Since police and detectives are not even generally aware or on the lookout for this type of criminal, for me, the most important behavioral consideration for an interview like this is, how do we recognize and identify these killers? The Killer, Across the Table, is available for pre-order now. John E. Douglas's 16th book joins the ranks of his true crime classics like Mindhunter and Inside the Mind of BTK, and revisits 4 of his most gruesome cases. Mining Douglas's quarter-century of experience with the FBI, these cases exemplify the 4 types of serial killers proposed by Douglas and co-writer Mark Olshaker. Case 2. On the evening of March 19, 1960, police were summoned to a ranch-style home in Independence, Missouri, 10 miles due east of Kansas City. There, a young housewife claimed she heard a gun go off in the bedroom where her husband, James Kinay, had been sleeping. Upon entering, she said, she found her young daughter, Dana, holding a .22 caliber pistol, and her husband shot in the back of the head. The victim was loaded into an ambulance. By the time he arrived at the hospital, Sharon Kinay's husband was dead. After an investigation in which the toddler proved she could indeed pull a trigger on a .22 caliber pistol, the police declared James Kinay's death an accident. Kinay was free to go, but she would soon be under suspicion again. In April of that year, using money from her husband's insurance policy, Kinay purchased a Ford Thunderbird from a car salesman named Walter Jones. The two hit it off and soon began an affair. Their relationship was troubled from the start. Jones was married at the time to a woman named Patricia. In May, Kinay requested Jones join her on a trip. Jones declined. Upon her return at the end of May, Kinney informed Jones she was pregnant with his child. She expected he would leave his wife. Instead, Jones broke off their relationship. Not long after that, Patricia, Walter Jones's wife, went missing. After filing a missing persons report, Jones spoke with Patricia's friends in hopes of uncovering clues as to the whereabouts of his wife. One group who carpooled to work with Patricia had an intriguing story to tell. They informed him that Patricia had received a mysterious phone call on the day of her disappearance. The caller was female and wished to speak with her after work. Patricia agreed to the meeting, asking her carpool driver to drop her off at a meetup spot in Independence. They confirmed that a woman was waiting for Patricia. Jones confronted Kinney. She admitted she had indeed met with Patricia that day and told her about the affair. Afterward, Kinney claimed she dropped her off near the Jones household. Jones, dubious, demanded Kinney come clean. Kinney stuck with her story, claiming innocence. She even enlisted an old high school lover named John Boldes to help search for Patricia. Sure enough, the pair quickly discovered Patricia Jones's body, riddled with bullets, in a remote area outside of town. Police questioned Kinney, John Boldes, and Jones, and subsequently arrested Kinney for the murder of Patricia Jones. What's more, they announced that Kinney would also be tried for the murder of her husband, James Kinney. But Sharon Kinney was pregnant, and the trials would have to wait until after she delivered her baby. Police questioned Kinney, John Boldes, and Jones, and subsequently arrested Kinney for the murder of Patricia Jones. What's more, they announced that Kinney would also be tried for the murder of her husband, James Kinney. But Sharon Kinney was pregnant, and the trials would have to wait until after she delivered her baby. The trial for James Kinney's murder, however, proved far more complicated. The first trial in January 1962 ended in a conviction, yet the verdict of life behind bars was overturned due to procedural irregularities. A second trial ended abruptly in a mistrial, while a third trial in July 1964 ended in a hung jury, allowing Kinney out on bond. Before her fourth trial could begin in October 1964, Kinney skipped town and headed to Mexico with a boyfriend named Francis Pugliese. She claimed they intended to get married there, but Kinney just couldn't resist another violent episode. After meeting an American tourist, Francisco Paredes Ordóñez, in a bar, Kinney went back to his hotel room. She claimed he tried to rape her, and she shot him, killing him and wounding a hotel employee who entered the room after he heard gunshots. A return on ballistics revealed that the gun that killed Ordóñez was the same gun that had killed Patricia Jones. Mexican police didn't believe Kinney's protestations about attempted rape and tried her for homicide. In October 1965, she was convicted and received a 10-year prison sentence. A subsequent appeal and judicial review had an adverse effect on Kinney's case, extending her sentence to 13 years, claiming the first had been too lenient. Kinney spent the next 4 years in a Mexican prison, earning the nickname La Pistolera, the gunfighter. Then, on December 7th, 1969, Sharon Kinney didn't show up for the daily roll call in prison. By the next morning, it was obvious she had escaped. Some believe she bribed the guards and made her escape during a convenient blackout the night before. Others believe her boyfriend aided in her escape. One lurid theory claims that the family of her last victim busted her out of jail for the pleasure of killing her themselves. The FBI, working in tandem with Mexican authorities, entertained a brief search for Kinney, claiming that it was unlikely she would return to the United States and had instead probably made her way into Guatemala. Kinney's warrant for the murder of her husband James, issued in 1964, is still active to this day. making it the longest outstanding arrest warrant in the Kansas City area and one of the longest outstanding felony warrants in United States history. Sharon Kinney's good looks and sensational story made her a larger-than-life figure in the press at the time. Now that over 40 years have passed with Kinney on the lam, it's obvious that she is no common criminal. La Pistolera is likely still out there, somewhere. Case 3. It was the 29th of August, 1995, a Tuesday. Mark Winger called 911 at 4:27 p.m. to report that a man was killing his wife. Mark told the dispatcher that he shot the man. Mark lived in Springfield, Illinois, United States, with his 31-year-old wife, Donna Winger. When police arrived at the scene, they found Donna in a critical state. She had been hit 7 times in the head with a hammer. A man, who police identified as 27-year-old Roger Harrington, was in a critical state on the ground beside Donna. He had suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the head. They were both rushed to the hospital. Roger died shortly after arriving at the hospital, and Donna died a few minutes later, having never regained consciousness. Police sealed off the house. There was no sign of forced entry. A visibly distressed Mark told police that he shot the man because he saw him attacking his wife. Mark told police that he was in the basement on the treadmill and heard noises upstairs, so he went to take a look. He saw that their adopted baby Bailey was on the bed in the master bedroom. There was no sign of Donna, and when Mark heard more noises downstairs, he took his handgun from the nightstand in the bedroom and walked towards the dining room. According to Mark, he saw a man swinging a hammer at Donna in the hallway. Mark shot the man, and when the man tried to get up from the ground, Mark shot him a second time. Police found the hammer that was used to bludgeon Donna with. It was covered in blood. The hammer belonged to Donna and Mark. They found a .45 caliber semi-automatic handgun in the house. That handgun belonged to Mark, and he confirmed to police that that was what he used to shoot the man with. Mark asked police if they knew who the man who attacked his wife was. They didn't tell him the man's name, and Mark asked them if it was a man named Roger. And when they confirmed the man was Roger, Mark said, according to Mark, Donna went to visit her parents in Florida 6 days earlier, and Donna's mother dropped her off at the airport and hired a driver via a limousine company to pick her up in St. Louis, Missouri, and drive her back to Springfield. That driver was Roger. According to Mark, Donna told him that Roger talked a lot during the 2-hour drive back to Springfield, and she found him to be quite flirtatious as he told her that he liked older women and invited her to sex parties. The conversation became more sinister when he told her that he kept hearing a voice in his head named Dom. Dom would tell him to hurt people. Mark told police. Donna was relieved when she got back to Springfield and told her family she was frightened and that the conversation was alarming and the driving erratic. Mark told police that even though Donna made it home safely, that wasn't the end of the matter. She received a number of strange phone calls, and due to the timing of them, she believed Roger was the person making the calls. Police found a note describing Donna's car ride in the house. Mark also told police that he reported the matter to the limousine company where Roger worked, and he was suspended, and that may have escalated matters. Police found Roger's car parked outside the Winger house. It was facing the wrong direction, and they found a number of weapons inside it, such as a knife and a tire iron. Police believed that Mark should not face any charges as he acted in self-defense, and the case was closed as they felt he had already suffered enough. Mark seemed completely devastated. He moved to Springfield with Donna straight after their wedding for work, and they were happy there. Donna worked at Memorial Medical Center, as an operating room technician, and he worked as an engineer for the Illinois Department of Nuclear Safety. Things weren't always easy for the couple. When Donna discovered she couldn't get pregnant, she was distraught. That changed when a doctor who worked with Donna told her that a teenager wanted to put her baby up for adoption, and the doctor asked if Donna would be interested. She was. Mark wanted the baby too, and they welcomed the newborn Bailey into their home on the 1st of June, 1995. After Donna's death, Mark still had Bailey, who was just a few months old, to care for, so he remained in the same house, but hired a nanny, Rebecca Simic, to help. Just a few months after moving in, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant with Mark's baby, who they named Anna. Mark later married Rebecca, and just over a year after Donna's death, Mark sold the house and cut ties with Donna's family. He moved out of town to a new house with Rebecca and the children. They went on to have another 2 children, named Maggie and Ben. In 1999, Donna's close friend, Deanne Schultz, told police that she had an affair with Mark when Donna was still alive, and there was something he said that still bothered her. According to Deanne, Mark said, "It would be easier for us to be together if Donna just died. All you'd have to do is come in and find the body." She also told them something which concerned them greatly. When Mark found out about Donna's bad experience with the car ride back to Springfield, he told Deanne that he had to get the driver in his house. That prompted police to look at Donna's case again. But they discovered, much to their dismay, that some of the evidence was gone. Mark filed a civil lawsuit against BART Transportation as he wanted to hold that company accountable for Donna's death due to Roger's actions. Roger was their employee at the time of Donna's death, and due to that, his attorney asked for the evidence and files to be released to their care so they could use it for the civil suit. Despite that, police had access to some of the file, and they looked at the photos that were taken on the day. There were photos of Donna and Roger on the ground before they were taken to hospital. But the position of the bodies didn't seem to match with what Mark told them years earlier. At the time, Mark told them that Roger was kneeling down right next to Donna's head, hitting her with the hammer when he saw him, and that was when he shot him. According to Mark, he fell back, and when he tried to get up, he shot him a second time. His feet should have been near Donna's head, and he should have been opposite her. But according to the photos that were taken when police arrived, both Roger and Donna were on the ground facing the same direction. Police, for the first time, began to suspect that Mark may have been involved in his wife's murder. But that didn't explain why Roger was at their house that day. Around the same time, the civil suit that Mark was involved in provided a possible explanation. BART Transportation hired a blood spatter expert, and they believed that the blood spatter showed that Mark killed both Donna and Roger. As police investigated further, they found more incriminating evidence. Roger's roommate, Susan Collins, told police that she heard Roger arrange to meet someone the day he was killed, and police found a note written on a bank deposit slip inside his car. The note had Mark's name on it, along with his address and a time. Susan told police that Roger told her he agreed to meet Mark to sort things out, as Mark had complained to his boss about his driving and the discussion he had had with Donna. He left the house at 3:30 p.m. Police believe that Mark asked him to meet him at his house at 4:30 p.m., and the time written on the note in Roger's card was 4:30 p.m. also. Mark was arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder on the 23rd of August, 2001. It was the prosecution case that Mark killed Donna and Roger. It was their case that Mark wanted Donna out of his life, but didn't want to lose custody of their adopted baby Bailey, so did not want to divorce her. It was their case that he saw an opportunity to do so when Mark heard about the trouble Donna had with Roger. He thought it was the perfect opportunity to kill Donna and frame an innocent man. The prosecution believed that Mark contacted Roger. They had never met before that day, and asked him to meet him at the house, and when he got there, he let him inside and shot him dead. The court heard there was no sign of forced entry at the home. It was their case that Donna was in the master bedroom at the time with Bailey and heard the gunshot, and when she went downstairs, Mark beat her to death with a hammer and then called 911. To prove that Mark lured Roger there, they told the jury about the note found in Roger's car that had Mark's name and address on it. The jury heard that Roger had weapons in his car but didn't bring them inside the house and instead attacked Donna with her own hammer. They questioned why he would do that if he went there that day to attack Donna. The court also heard about the account Mark gave to police about where Roger was when he shot him, and they saw the photos that were taken that same day that suggested that that wasn't the case. Deanne testified, and the court heard about the statements she alleged Mark made that he wanted Donna dead. The court heard that 4 days before the murders, on the 25th of August, 1995, Mark asked his co-worker, Candace Bolden, what would happen to his adopted daughter if Donna died. Later that same day, Mark called the president of the transport company where Roger worked, Ray Duffy, and complained about Donna's ride. A couple of days later, he called again to ask for the driver's full name and if he could discuss the matter directly with him. The court heard about the injuries that Donna and Roger sustained. When police arrived at the house, they found Donna lying face down on the floor and Roger was on his back. It was determined that Donna died as a result of brain trauma due to multiple blunt force injuries to the head that were consistent with hammer strikes. Roger died from brain trauma due to gunshot wounds to the top, left side of his head, and above his left eyebrow. His chest had contusions caused by hammer strikes. The defense claimed that the erratic decisions taken that day from the weapon used to how his car was parked indicated that Roger was mentally unwell, and they argued that was evident from the car ride with Donna. In relation to the position of the bodies and the photos, the defense argued that while Donna and Roger were critical when paramedics arrived, they weren't dead, and the paramedics may have moved them when trying to save their lives. The paramedics denied moving them prior to the photos being taken, and Mark didn't give testimony at his trial. In relation to Deanne's testimony, the defense argued that she was nothing more than a woman scorned. She had been having an affair with Mark. Mark admitted that, but as soon as Donna died, he moved on with the nanny he hired and married her a very short time later. And the defense argued that Deanne was furious, that she wasn't the person he chose to marry. The jury found Mark guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In 2005, while still incarcerated for the first-degree murder convictions, Mark was implicated in a murder-for-hire plot that was subsequently foiled. It was alleged that he tried to put a hit on Deanne for testifying against him and on Jeffrey Gelman, a childhood friend, for not posting his $1 million bail. 19 pages of handwritten notes were found outlining what Mark wanted to happen to Deanne. He wanted her to be kidnapped and forced to write down a statement saying that she lied about Mark and that she now believes he is an innocent man. The notes outlined that he wanted her to be killed after the statement was written. Mark told the jury that the notes just outlined a fantasy that he never planned to carry out. He was found guilty of solicitation of murder and sentenced to an additional 35 years in prison. Donna's mother, Sarah Jane, and Donna's stepfather, Ira Drescher, told CBS that they were overwhelmed by the evidence against Mark. And what's so hard to understand is the way he murdered Donna was so vicious and so violent. Mark maintains his innocence. Deanne was granted immunity for her testimony, and as a result of that, she faced no charges. Case 4. It was the 24th of January, 1988, a Sunday. 46-year-old Janet Overton had breakfast at her home in Dana Point, California, United States, before packing up the car on the driveway with help from her 18-year-old son, Eric. They had plans that day. They had arranged to spend time with friends on a boat to go whale watching. But before Janet could even get into the car, she collapsed on the driveway. Eric asked his father, Richard Overton, who was inside the house at the time, to call 911. He did, and Janet was rushed to hospital, but she was pronounced dead before she made it to the hospital. Janet's death came as a great shock to her family, friends, and colleagues. She worked as a school board leader and lived with her husband of 19 years, Richard, and their son, Eric. Janet was a much-loved and popular woman in the community, so her death devastated many people, and everyone wanted to know what happened to her. She had been ill in the years leading up to that day, but despite going to see a number of different doctors, nobody could tell her what was wrong. The autopsy didn't provide any explanation as to what caused Janet's death either. The result was inconclusive, and her death certificate listed the cause of death as unknown. Even though there was no satisfactory explanation for Janet's death, there was also no evidence found of any foul play. Richard told police that he loved his wife dearly and she would be greatly missed. Her death seemed to be a complete mystery. While investigators didn't believe there was anything sinister involved in relation to Janet's death, there was one woman who wasn't so sure, and she notified police of her suspicions 6 months after Janet's death. That woman, Dorothy Boyer, told them that they should take a closer look at Janet's case, as she knew exactly what Richard was capable of. Dorothy told police that Richard had tried to murder her through a process of slow poisoning. According to Dorothy, she was married to Richard 20 years earlier, and she thought they had a happy marriage until she discovered that he was living a double life. Despite the fact that Richard lived with Dorothy and their 4 children at the time, he also had a second home. He spent some of his time living with another woman named Caroline Hutchison. Unbeknown to Dorothy, Richard had also married Caroline, and they had a child together. When Dorothy found out about Caroline, she filed for divorce. As part of the divorce settlement, Dorothy kept the family home, and she continued to live there after the divorce was finalized in 1969. Richard was furious that Dorothy divorced him and remained in the family home. Around the same time that the divorce was finalized, Janet became ill. She suffered from nausea all the time and had sore lesions on her body. One day, when Richard was at the house, she noticed there was a strange odor from her milk and believed Richard had spiked her drink. Dorothy took the milk to the police and asked them to test it, and they discovered there was a large amount of selenium in it. Selenium can be fatal in large doses. The police confronted Richard, and he confessed that he had been putting it in her food and drink after they divorced. He agreed to seek psychological counseling to get help, and as such, Dorothy opted not to press charges. But when she heard about Janet's death, she was worried that Richard had poisoned Janet, so she told police everything she knew and everything that had happened to her. Dorothy was also able to provide physical evidence. According to Dorothy, she called over to the Overtons' house after Janet's death so that her daughter could see Richard, and when she was there, she found a woman's eyeliner, rubber gloves, an electronic device containing selenium, and a syringe in Richard's desk drawer. She gave them to the police, and they carried out tests and confirmed that the eyeliner contained selenium. Based on that new information, police looked at the circumstances surrounding Janet's death again. They were aware she had been ill in the period leading up to her death, and that her symptoms included nausea, difficulty walking. She had painful sores and rashes all over her body and had peeling and discolored feet. Police discovered that they were the same symptoms that Dorothy had after she divorced Richard. Police believed Dorothy's version of events, but they are also aware that the circumstances were different. Richard poisoned Dorothy after she divorced him, and he was furious at the time. But according to Richard, he was happily married to Janet, and there were no problems. So police had to establish, firstly, if Janet was poisoned or not, and secondly, if Richard was the person who poisoned her. Police couldn't seek to exhume Janet's body as she had been cremated, so they had to rely on evidence that had already been stored. Tests were carried out on samples of Janet's tissue, but no trace of selenium was found. Police asked Paul Sedgwick, a retired coroner's toxicologist for the Orange County Sheriff's Department, to examine Janet's stomach contents to see if there was any evidence of foul play. Paul immediately smelled cyanide and determined the amount of cyanide found in Janet's stomach meant that she ingested it shortly before her death. Traces of it was also found in her brain tissue, and that indicated she had ingested it on a previous occasion. The chief forensic toxicologist for the coroner's office, Robert H. Cravey, said that it was missed during the initial autopsy as cyanide or selenium are not routinely tested for and would only be tested for if an investigator was suspicious and requested it, or if the person conducting the autopsy knew the smell of cyanide, like Paul did, and tested for it. The smell of cyanide has a bitter almond smell, but not everyone can detect it. Robert explained that it is easy to miss it as it's genetic. All people can't smell cyanide. Police now believed they knew exactly what caused Janet's death, but they had to establish how Janet could have ingested the cyanide that killed her. They discovered that Richard had a friend who was involved in gold mining, and Richard had access to cyanide and other metallurgy material that were stored at his friend's house. They obtained a search warrant for Richard's house to look for cyanide and selenium. During the course of that search, they obtained Richard's journals and his computer. Some of the files on his computer had been deleted. They retrieved some of the deleted files, and Richard's journal entries showed that, despite what Richard said, Richard and Janet were not in a happy marriage. Even though they lived together, they lived almost entirely separate lives. They didn't sleep together or even eat together. In fact, some of the journal entries revealed that Richard hated Janet and that his love had turned to pure hate, and that he would deal with that soon. He was angry and resented her. Richard recorded all of Janet's activities and what she did day to day in his journal, including his belief that she was having affairs with a number of men. He was particularly annoyed about one man named Bill Dawson. Janet was due to go whale watching with Bill and her son Eric the day she died. The journal entry for the 24th of January, the day Janet died, had been ripped out of his journal. The police investigation revealed that Richard put a note about Janet's involvement in an extramarital affair with a school official on all the cars in the parking lot at the district office where Janet was a board member. That incident had caused her great distress at the time, as she initially didn't know who put the note on all the cars. Police spoke to some of Janet's friends, and they told them that Janet and Richard were complete opposites. He was a college lecturer and a mathematician with a doctorate in psychology and a business consultant, and was concerned only about status, whereas Janet was a fun-loving, popular woman who enjoyed being around people and helping them, and she was fiercely independent. They initially bonded over their love of computers, but 19 years later, the cracks in the marriage were clear to see due to Richard's journal entries, and it was evident they were heading for divorce. But police discovered that Janet was reluctant to divorce Richard, as she didn't want to have to give him a share of the $100,000 inheritance she had received from her mother's estate. Richard was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. He pleaded not guilty. At the time of his trial, he was married to his fourth wife, Carol Townsend. The trial began, and 7 weeks into the trial, Richard testified. He was cross-examined for 2 days. It was a difficult time for him on the stand, as he was asked questions by the prosecutor about his ex-wife, Dorothy. On the stand, Richard admitted that he put prescription drugs in Dorothy's coffee in the past, but said that he thought it was just a neat joke to play on her, as he believed she was mistreating their children. But he claimed that he did not do the same to Janet. On the third day that he was due to be cross-examined, he complained of chest pains and dizziness in court. The trial had to be stopped, and Richard was taken out of court on a gurney, and a recess was ordered. The trial was postponed for a couple of months. After 2 months, the defense could not proceed with the case, and they requested a further postponement, which was granted. That postponement was due to the health of Richard's lawyer. The court heard that his lawyer, Robert D. Chatterton, was clinically depressed. That raised questions about the adequacy of his defense, and after a few months, the 4th District Court of Appeal in Santa Ana declared a mistrial in the case and said that there was the strong likelihood that jurors' attitudes had become set during the unprecedented recess. The mistrial was declared based on the extraordinary delay of more than 6 months between the presentation of the prosecution case and the defense case. A new trial began with a new jury sworn in. It was the prosecution case that Richard murdered Janet, and did so by poisoning her over a period of time with toxic levels of selenium and cyanide. And they believed that on the day she died, he put cyanide into her orange juice before she left the house that morning. The jury heard that the cause of death was changed from natural causes to acute cyanide intoxication after further tests were carried out, and cyanide was found following the report Dorothy gave to police. The prosecution told the jury that they believed that Richard had the means, motive, and opportunity to kill Janet. The court heard that Richard had access to the cyanide, and that his journal entries showed that he was furious at Janet and hated her, and that their marriage had deteriorated. It was the prosecution case that hatred led to him poisoning Janet with selenium and cyanide, and he put it on her eyeliner and in her food and drink over a period of time, and that caused her to become ill. The court heard that in the years leading up to her death, the evidence that she was being poisoned was clear in hindsight from the symptoms she had. Janet's symptoms were similar to the ones Dorothy had experienced. Janet also suffered from dehydration and lesions that were so painful that the friction of her clothes became almost unbearable. The jury heard that she also found it hard to walk and needed the assistance of crutches. The court heard that Janet tried to get help and went to her physician and several doctors, but they could not explain what was happening to her. She even checked herself into the Scripps Clinic and Research Foundation in La Jolla on 2 occasions, but the doctors there were unable to give a diagnosis. No explanation was ever given to Janet as to why or how her health was rapidly deteriorating. It was the prosecution case that her symptoms were consistent with selenium poisoning. The trial began, and 7 weeks into the trial, Richard testified. He was cross-examined for 2 days. It was a difficult time for him on the stand as he was asked questions by the prosecutor about his ex-wife, Dorothy. On the stand, Richard admitted that he put prescription drugs in Dorothy's coffee in the past, but said that he thought it was just a neat joke to play on her as he believed she was mistreating their children. But he claimed that he did not do the same to Janet. On the third day that he was due to be cross-examined, he complained of chest pains and dizziness in court. The trial had to be stopped, and Richard was taken out of court on a gurney, and a recess was ordered. The trial was postponed for a couple of months. After 2 months, the defense could not proceed with the case, and they requested a further postponement, which was granted. That postponement was due to the health of Richard's lawyer. The court heard that his lawyer, Robert D. Chatterton, was clinically depressed. That raised questions about the adequacy of his defense, and after a few months, the 4th District Court of Appeal in Santa Ana declared a mistrial in the case and said that there was the strong likelihood that jurors' attitudes had become set during the unprecedented recess. The mistrial was declared based on the extraordinary delay of more than 6 months between the presentation of the prosecution case and the defense case. A new trial began with a new jury sworn in. It was the prosecution case that Richard murdered Janet, and did so by poisoning her over a period of time with toxic levels of selenium and cyanide, and they believed that on the day she died, he put cyanide into her orange juice before she left the house that morning. The jury heard that the cause of death was changed from natural causes to acute cyanide intoxication after further tests were carried out, and cyanide was found following the report Dorothy gave to police. The prosecution told the jury that they believed that Richard had the means, motive, and opportunity to kill Janet. The court heard that Richard had access to the cyanide, and that his journal entries showed that he was furious at Janet and hated her, and that their marriage had deteriorated. It was the prosecution case that hatred led to him poisoning Janet with selenium and cyanide, and he put it on her eyeliner and in her food and drink over a period of time, and that caused her to become ill. The court heard that in the years leading up to her death, the evidence that she was being poisoned was clear in hindsight from the symptoms she had. Janet's symptoms were similar to the ones Dorothy had experienced. Janet also suffered from dehydration and lesions that were so painful that the friction of her clothes became almost unbearable. The jury heard that she also found it hard to walk and needed the assistance of crutches. The court heard that Janet tried to get help and went to her physician and several doctors, but they could not explain what was happening to her. She even checked herself into the Scripps Clinic and Research Foundation in La Jolla on 2 occasions, but the doctors there were unable to give a diagnosis. No explanation was ever given to Janet as to why or how her health was rapidly deteriorating. It was the prosecution case that her symptoms were consistent with selenium poisoning. Case 5. It was the 2nd of September 2015, a Wednesday. 35-year-old Kendra Hatcher pulled into the parking garage at Gables Park 17. She lived there, and it felt safe as there was a 24-hour concierge service, and it was a vibrant and luxurious apartment block with a saltwater infinity pool, a fitness studio, and a gourmet coffee bar in uptown Dallas, Texas, United States. She grew up in Pleasant Plains, Illinois, and studied dentistry there, but moved to Dallas for work. She had recently accepted a job at Smile Zone. It seemed a perfect fit for her. Kendra had a strong Christian faith and wanted to use her skills as a dentist to help others. Smile Zone offered high-end dentistry to children from disadvantaged households. In her spare time, Kendra taught Bible study and took part in volunteer programs. which involved building churches abroad and performing free dental work for children in Ecuador. Kendra's professional life was going from strength to strength, and her personal life was blossoming too. Kendra was in a relationship with Dr. Ricardo Ricky Paniagua. Ricky was completing a dermatology residency at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center, and even though they had only been in a relationship for a few months, they had already discussed marriage. Kendra and Ricky met via the dating app Tinder and went on their first date on the 24th of May, and from that very first date, they were inseparable. They both had similar values and wanted the same things in life. That evening, the 2nd of September, Kendra drove into the parking garage to park her car after work. She got there at 7:42 p.m. It was something she did every day, but she was excited for the weekend ahead, as she had plans to spend that Labor Day weekend in Mexico with Ricky. But Kendra would never make it to Mexico. Just minutes after she drove into the parking garage, two men walking through the parking garage heard the sound of screams and shots fired. After the shots were heard, a Jeep Cherokee was seen speeding out of the garage. Hashem Saad, who lived in the apartment complex, heard the screams and called 911. When police arrived, they found Kendra's body in the parking garage. She had been shot dead. The initial thought was that it was a robbery, as Kendra's coach purse was missing. Bullet shards and a handgun magazine were found on the ground beside her body. But as police investigated further and examined the scene, they thought the manner of the shooting did not suggest that was a robbery. It seemed more like an execution-style shooting. The gunshot residue found indicated that Kendra had her hands up and behind her head when she was shot. The entry wound came from the upper part of her head, and the bullet exited through her chin. But who would want to kill Kendra in an execution-style shooting? By all accounts, she was well-liked and helped anyone she could. Police obtained the security cameras at Gables Park 17. The footage showed a Jeep Grand Cherokee entering the parking garage at 7:15 p.m. The footage showed Kendra returning home and driving into that same garage at 7:42 p.m. The footage captured a man walking towards Kendra's car, and then that same man was captured on the footage returning to the Jeep. Police believed that that was the man who shot Kendra. The footage revealed that there was another person involved. The driver of the Jeep was a woman, and she drove out of the parking garage as soon as the man got back into the Jeep. But it wasn't clear enough to be able to identify them, so police released images of the Jeep and the driver to the media and appealed to the public for help. That appeal worked. A man named Jose Luis Ortiz contacted police and told them that the Jeep was his, but that he wasn't involved in any shooting and wasn't driving it at the time of the murder. Jose told police that on the morning of the 2nd of September, two friends of his named Brenda Delgado and Crystal Cortez asked if they could borrow his Jeep. He said that they told him that Crystal's car was having mechanical issues, and they left the car with Jose for him to work on it. And he gave them his Jeep to use in the meantime. They were supposed to drop the Jeep back to him that evening after work, but instead Brenda asked him to meet him at a Chili's restaurant that evening, and he agreed. Crystal wasn't at the restaurant, and neither was his Jeep. Jose told police that he was with Brenda at the restaurant at the time the shooting took place. The Jeep was returned to Jose's house later that night. Jose had no idea that his Jeep would be used as a getaway car. He said that the first time he became aware of it was when he saw the appeal the police made and recognized his Jeep. He asked Brenda about it, and she told him that it wasn't his Jeep, but then later said that Crystal used it to go there to get drugs for somebody, and probably something went wrong. Jose told police that Brenda urged him not to say anything, as it was his Jeep, and that he could get in trouble with the police and risk his citizenship. He felt that she was trying to manipulate him. According to Jose, Brenda suggested that he paint the Jeep a different color, and she would pay for it. After speaking to Brenda, Jose reported the matter to the police. Police spoke to Brenda and asked her about Kendra. Brenda told police that she had no idea who Kendra was and never saw her before. They asked her where she was at 7:42 p.m. the night of the 2nd of September, and Brenda told police that she was at a Chili's restaurant with Jose and she showed them the receipts for the dinner. Police asked her about Jose's Jeep. According to Brenda, she gave the Jeep to Crystal. Police questioned Crystal. She was a 23-year-old single mother. They asked her if she was the woman seen on the footage driving the Jeep. She confirmed that she was. She initially told police that an armed carjacker got into the Jeep and forced her to drive to the parking garage that night. She told police her 9-year-old son was with her, but the footage showed that there was no child in the car. When police told her that, Crystal changed her story. She told police that there was no carjacking, and she drove the man to the garage willingly, but claimed that she thought it was just for a robbery. She insisted she knew nothing about the shooting. Police asked her why she agreed to drive there in the first place, even if she did believe it was for a robbery, and she told them that Brenda asked her to do it. Police asked her why Brenda would want to steal from Kendra, and she told them that Kendra was dating Brenda's former boyfriend. Police discovered that Brenda and Ricky dated on and off from 2012 until the beginning of 2015. When they separated, he began dating Kendra, and Brenda wasn't happy. But Ricky had no idea that she was unhappy. He ended the relationship in February 2015 and dated other women. When he met Kendra in May, he knew it was serious, so he sent Brenda an email out of courtesy to let her know he was in a serious relationship. He didn't tell her Kendra's name, and Brenda seemed fine and told him that she hoped they would remain friends. As the questioning continued and the evidence mounted, Crystal wanted to make a plea deal, and she agreed to testify in exchange for a shorter sentence. She told police that Brenda wanted Kendra dead, and the murder was all her idea. According to Crystal, within 2 weeks of her meeting Brenda, they began planning Kendra's murder. Police discovered that Brenda wasn't just unhappy that her relationship with Ricky was over, she was obsessed and desperate to get him back. She pretended to Ricky that she was happy being friends, but her life had started to unravel. Her grades dropped and she missed work. She set about making it her full-time job almost to get Ricky back. She cyberstalked both Kendra and Ricky and hacked Ricky's email and discovered plans they were making and trips they booked. She grew to resent Kendra. She believed that Kendra had taken her place. According to Crystal, she made up her mind that she wanted to get rid of Kendra Hatcher. Brenda asked Crystal if she knew anyone who could help, and Crystal agreed to help. They began making a plan to kill Kendra. They met up numerous times and devised multiple plans. The initial plan was to inject Kendra with heroin or a sedative, and then they discussed shooting her. Brenda asked Crystal if she could find someone to do it, or if she knew anyone, as she was from a rundown area. They drove around and asked a number of people if they could help. They later met a man named Christopher Love. He agreed to help, and they discussed different ways that they could kill Kendra. They made a unanimous decision that the best way to kill her would be to shoot her, as it would be fast. Crystal told police that Brenda agreed to give her $500, and she agreed to give Christopher money and drugs. Crystal told police that they chose to kill Kendra on the 2nd of September, as they were aware that Kendra and Ricky had plans for Labor Day weekend and would be leaving Dallas on the 3rd of September to go to Mexico for a vacation. Brenda believed they had to do it before then, as she became aware that they made plans to move to San Francisco when they got back. Brenda knew about all of their plans and everything they did, as she had loaded Ricky's iPhone account onto another phone and used that to track/stalk him. Brenda told Crystal that she wanted the killing to look like a robbery gone bad. To decide where to carry out the killing, Brenda and Crystal decided to follow Kendra to see what her movements were like on a regular and normal day for her. They followed her to work. They sat outside a Salvation Army and used binoculars to monitor her movements while she was at work. After work, they followed her back and discovered how best to gain access into the parking garage. They figured out that they could easily get inside if they parked in a visitor spot first, and then followed another car into the garage. They did that same routine for a few days to ensure that nothing changed. They were confident they knew exactly what Kendra would do on the 2nd of September. The three of them, Brenda, Crystal, and Christopher, did one last run through the day before, on the 1st of September, and timed it. They stole gloves, syringes, disinfectant spray, and wipes from Kendra's workplace. The next day, the 2nd of September, the plan was for Crystal and Christopher to carry out the murder alone. Early that morning, Brenda and Crystal collected the Jeep from Jose and picked up Christopher at a jack in the box. Brenda was dropped off at a library in Carrollton, and Crystal and Christopher went to Kendra's apartment complex alone. When they got there, they waited across the street for 30 minutes or so and drove to Kendra's place of work. Crystal left to pick up her son and nephew from school and dropped them off with her grandmother. She drove back to Kendra's place of work and followed her when she left. They lost her in traffic and they got back first, so they accessed the garage and waited for her there. As soon as Kendra drove in, Christopher got out of the car. He was wearing gloves and approached Kendra with the gun and shot her as she got out of the car. According to Crystal, she didn't actually see the shooting, but heard it. They left, and after Crystal dropped Christopher home, she collected her son and later met Brenda at Jose's house, where she dropped back his Jeep. On foot of the deal Crystal made, she would be the star witness for the prosecution. There would be 2 trials. Christopher and Brenda were charged with capital murder, and their trials were heard separately. In exchange for her testimony and her guilty plea to a murder charge, Crystal was sentenced to 35 years in prison. Police found a gun hidden in a side compartment in Christopher's car. The gun was the one used to shoot Kendra. Due to that, Christopher was willing to talk. He told police that Brenda promised to pay him in both drugs and money, and that he was hired by her to shoot Kendra. Christopher was found guilty and sentenced to death. Before Brenda faced trial, she went on the run for almost 7 months. She was even featured on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. She was arrested in April 2016 in Torreon, Coahuila, Mexico. Mexico agreed to extradite her, but only on the basis that she would not face the death penalty. When she was extradited back to the United States, she was formally charged with capital murder. Her family and Ricky initially didn't believe that Brenda could be involved. They knew her as a loving woman, wholesome, and someone who had good family and Christian values. Ricky told police that when he ended the relationship with her, they remained friends, and he even sent her a text message the night Kendra was shot to let her know. She offered to help in any way she could. Brenda pleaded not guilty, and her defense argued that she wasn't even there when Kendra was shot and had an alibi and receipts to prove she was at a Chili's restaurant at the time of the murder. But it was the prosecution case that Kendra was killed as part of a murder for hire scheme orchestrated by Brenda. Brenda did not need to be there at the time of the shooting to be guilty of murder, and could still be found guilty as she planned and orchestrated the entire thing, and she was the person who hired Crystal and Christopher to carry out the murder. The court heard that Brenda had a motive to want Kendra dead. She saw her as being an obstacle to getting what she wanted. It was her desire to be back with Ricky. The court heard that in the months leading up to Kendra's death, Brenda had become increasingly obsessed with her and Ricky. The court heard testimony about that obsession from a number of people who knew Brenda. Her cousin, Moses Martinez, testified that Brenda was depressed after her relationship with Ricky ended. He testified that she offered to pay him if he hit Kendra with a baseball bat. He declined to do so. Brenda's friend, Jennifer Escobar, testified that Brenda was super obsessed with and angry towards Ricky when he ended their relationship. She told the court that Brenda would read through all of his emails and tracked his movements on her phone. She told the jury that Brenda had even kept a copy of his house key and had access to his bank accounts. Jennifer testified that Brenda asked her to eliminate Kendra Hatcher. She told the court that Brenda wanted her to either inject her with something fatal or use a bat and leave her in a coma. She told the court that Brenda offered to give her $2,000, a car, and drugs if she would do it. Jennifer discussed the offer with her parents and then declined. It was the prosecution case that Brenda asked a number of people to help her before she finally found someone to agree. It was their case that she took advantage of Crystal. Crystal was a struggling single mother who made $11 per hour, and she looked up to Brenda, a woman who had her own apartment and money and wanted to be like her. The court heard that she gave Crystal $500, and police found the ATM withdrawal receipt for that amount in her belongings. She also paid Christopher. He was given a cash sum and $600 worth of marijuana and $300 worth of cocaine. The jury were told that Brenda was at Chili's the night Kendra was shot and went straight home afterwards. But the jurors were shown footage from a surveillance video from Jose's neighbor's house of the night of the murder. And the footage showed that Brenda was at Jose's house after Chili's, and she was there with Crystal, and they exchanged the Jeep for the car. The court heard that cell phone data also placed her with Crystal and Christopher before the murder, and that Brenda and Crystal contacted each other 99 times over a 2-week period, from the 22nd of August to the 4th of September. The jury deliberated for just 30 minutes and found Brenda guilty. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Case 6. It was the 8th of March, 2018, a Thursday. 22-year-old Haley Anderson was up late playing board games and drinking with her roommates. They finished just before 4 a.m. and went to bed. They were all students at Binghamton University in Binghamton, New York, United States, and were in their final year and were looking forward to graduation. Haley was in their nursing program, and she had a job lined up in an emergency department in Long Island. When Haley's roommate, Josie Arton, woke a few hours later, she noticed that Haley wasn't in bed. That didn't cause alarm, as they were college students and were all independent and did their own thing. But later that night, she was concerned. Haley was supposed to meet Josie and other friends at a bar, but didn't show up, which wasn't like her at all. Josie noticed that she didn't post anything on any of her social media channels all day either. When she called her on her cell phone, there was no answer, and none of the text messages that her friends sent were responded to. Along with another roommate, Josie tracked Haley's iPhone using the app Find My Friends. Haley's cell phone was at a house on Oak Street. Orlando Tercero lived there. Orlando was in the nursing program also, and he and Haley dated briefly on and off for a little over a year. Orlando was born in Miami and grew up in Nicaragua before returning to the United States to study. He was a good student and studied during the week, and he liked to party when he had time off. Josie and another roommate, Michela Topali, went to Oak Street to see if Haley was there. Police had been called to the house on Oak Street earlier that day. Orlando's sister asked them to carry out a welfare check as she had received a concerning text message from Orlando. Police called to the house, but there was no answer, and there didn't appear to be anyone home, so they left. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at the house. When Josie and Michela got there, there was also no answer when they knocked on the door, and there appeared to be nobody home. But they didn't leave. They stayed as they were worried about Haley. Orlando's car wasn't outside, but they knew from their app that Haley's phone was still inside. So they found a window that was open, and Josie helped Michelle climb inside first, and then she followed her. They found Haley in Orlando's bedroom, partially tucked in under the covers on his bed. They weren't certain, but believed she may be dead as she was so pale. They called 911. Police and emergency services arrived at the house and confirmed Haley was dead. She had been strangled to death. There was no sign of Orlando anywhere. Police discovered that Haley and Orlando dated on and off, but Haley ended the relationship. She wanted to remain friends with Orlando, but Orlando wanted more. They had dated on and off for around a year, and Orlando wanted a more serious and committed relationship, but that was not what Haley wanted. She didn't want to be tied down while in college. The investigation revealed that a troubling incident took place 6 months before Haley was found dead. On the 15th of September 2017, Haley was at a party, and Orlando was seen shouting at her. He found out that she got back together with her ex-boyfriend, Kevin Ocampo, and he wasn't happy about it. He wanted her to be in a relationship with him only. Haley again told him that she didn't want that, but she wanted to remain friends. That night, Kevin stayed in Haley's apartment, and when he left the apartment the next morning, he saw that the tires on Haley's car were slashed. Haley reported the matter to police, but Orlando denied it. As the damage was more than $600, felony charges would be involved, and Haley didn't want Orlando to lose his place at college, so she agreed not to press charges if he paid for the tires. Haley's friends told police that Orlando seemed obsessed with her. He would call over unannounced and drive by the apartment. He watched her all the time. Despite that, Haley liked him and remained in touch with him. She didn't want him to feel left out. Police needed to ascertain what happened after Haley finished drinking and playing board games with friends. How did she end up at Orlando's house? They knew there were a number of surveillance cameras in the area and outside the house where Orlando lived. They viewed them and observed that Haley and Orlando entered his house together. Haley seemed fine at that point and seemed to go into the house willingly. A few hours later, the footage revealed that Orlando left the house alone and cleared out his garbage. He then went to a local pharmacy, purchased 2 sleeping aids, Zquil and melatonin, and then went back to the house. The footage revealed he left again 7 hours later and walked down to the basement of the house. Police believed that at that point, Orlando tried to take his own life in the basement. They found hooks and a rope. They believed that he fell instead and hurt himself. There was blood on the floor in the basement. They found what they believed was a suicide note written in Spanish, and the English translation read, "I'm really sorry about this. I never felt I could be capable of doing this. Father, I'll see you soon." Orlando's father had died 5 years earlier. They believed the note was not just a suicide note, but a confession too. The footage showed Orlando later leaving the house with a suitcase, and police tracked his movements to JFK International Airport. They discovered that he boarded a flight to Nicaragua. He had dual citizenship, and his mother still lived in Nicaragua. As he had dual citizenship, in relation to possible extradition, authorities in Nicaragua did not have to extradite him to the United States. Despite that, authorities in the United States charged him with second-degree murder in the hope that he would be returned to the United States for a trial. Authorities in Nicaragua made every effort to find Orlando, and they found him in a hospital in the city of Leon just 5 days after Haley's death. He was at the hospital seeking medical treatment for injuries that he sustained when he tried to take his own life. There was a lot of back and forth between authorities in the United States and in Nicaragua, and it took over a year before authorities in Nicaragua felt they had enough to charge Orlando and send him forward for trial. To the initial dismay of authorities in the United States, the trial would take place in Nicaragua, and the charges differed from those he faced in the United States. He was charged with femicide, which is a specific hate crime in Nicaragua and involves the murder of a woman based on her gender, one with whom the perpetrator had a relationship with. The charge was not the only difference in court proceedings. In Nicaragua, there was no jury. A judge would listen to the prosecution and the defense and then make a judgment. Orlando was also not required to enter a plea. It was the prosecution case that Haley willingly entered the house with Orlando, and a short time later, he strangled her to death. They believed that he possibly strangled her while she was asleep. It was their case that he was obsessed with her, and if he couldn't have her, nobody else would. They believed that he strangled her in a jealous rage when she refused to be in a serious relationship with him, and they believed that he festered that rage for 6 months. They believed it began at the party 6 months earlier when he discovered Haley got back with her ex-boyfriend. The court heard from witnesses in the U.S. via teleconferencing. Some of Haley's friends testified about Orlando's obsessive side when it came to Haley, how he drove by and called to the apartment, and about the slashed tires. The judge saw the surveillance footage from outside Orlando's house, which showed him entering with Haley and leaving without her. The court heard that Orlando attempted to commit suicide, and about the note he left behind for his family. Dr. James Tersian, the pathologist who conducted Haley's autopsy, testified that the cause of Haley's death was asphyxiation by neck compression. The court heard that Haley was asphyxiated from manual neck compression, with an element of ligature strangulation involved due to the necklace she was wearing. The prosecution told the court that Haley was murdered because she didn't want to be with Orlando. It was her decision to make, but one that he was not happy with. It was the defense case that Orlando had no recollection whatsoever of what happened that night. They argued that due to the use of alcohol, Orlando was temporarily insane at the time of Haley's death. They only called one witness, a psychiatrist, to testify about his state of mind. Dr. Ronald Lopez Aguilar testified that when he examined Orlando stated he had no recollection of the murder. He told him that he drank heavily that night, and when he woke up, Haley was dead. He had no idea what happened to her. Dr. Lopez Aguilar told the court that there was no way to know what Orlando's state of mind was at the time of the murder. But in relation to his current state of mind, he told the court that there was nothing wrong with it. The defense argued that Orlando was not a violent man and he may have been provoked. The judge retired for 90 minutes and returned with a verdict. Judge Fabiola Betancourt told the court that she found Orlando guilty. She said that she found that Orlando simply did not accept that Haley could make her own decisions and decide who she wanted to date, and he disposed of her due to that, and he wanted to punish her because she rejected him. She sentenced him to the maximum sentence that she could for the charge of femicide, which was 30 years in prison. She told the court that all women have the right to life. The Broome County District Attorney Steve Cornwell, who was watching the case with keen interest, said, "We saw something that we haven't seen before, but we saw two governments working together, law enforcement agencies working together. Despite initial reservations about what the trial would be like, authorities in the United States were happy with how everything was conducted, and that it was a serious trial, not a show trial." Orlando appealed his conviction. The appeal was heard before 3 magistrates in Nicaragua. The defense argument was the same, namely that Orlando was drunk and temporarily insane at the time of the murder, but they asked the court for a new psychiatric evaluation. The one at the trial was conducted by a court-appointed psychiatrist, and the defense wanted a forensic psychiatrist who specialized in temporary insanity defenses to examine Orlando instead for the appeal hearing. They also argued that Orlando faced second-degree murder charges in the U.S., and if found guilty of that, he would have received less than a 30-year sentence, and on that basis, the sentence should be reviewed. They argued he should not have been charged with femicide. The magistrates rejected the appeal for a new psychiatrist and refused to reduce his sentence. He was ordered to remain in prison on foot of his 30-year sentence handed down at his trial. If for some reason Orlando is ever freed and returns to the U.S., police in the U.S. have made it clear that they will immediately arrest him so that he can face a trial for a second-degree murder charge there. After the court denied the appeal, Haley's parents, Karen and Gordon Anderson, thanked the court for their work. Karen said, "Thank you very much for not granting the appeal. I have not seen any remorse from him. I've only seen regret that he is not going to be able to lessen his sentence. Unfortunately, I don't even think 30 years is enough, but I appreciate all the work you have done to convict him to the fullest extent of the law." Gordon believes justice has been served and also thanked the court. "I thank the Nicaraguan court system. I was a little uneasy when it first came about, not having control of the situation here in the United States, but as the trial progressed, I quickly felt assured that the right thing would be done, and I think a remarkable job was done." Gordon wants people to remember Haley for the compassionate person she was, one who had a zest for life and one who lived to spread joy and love. Broome County District Attorney Steve Cornwell emphasized how important it was that Orlando was charged with femicide. America's legal system doesn't have a criminal charge quite like Nicaragua's femicide, but the protection it afforded Haley Anderson in this case was important. Orlando Tercero, in a cold-blooded manner, choked the life out of a young woman who, we believe, was probably sleeping and had been drinking. It doesn't get any more sick and depraved than that, preying on somebody who's helpless and completely overpowered them with no chance at all. Case 7. It was the 24th of May, 2014, a Saturday. 56-year-old Blessy Gotinko had just finished work and was on her way home. She lived with her husband of 30 years, Antonio Gotinko, in North Shore, Auckland, New Zealand. They met when they were just children, as they attended the same school in Cebu City in the Philippines. They dated for a few years, got married, and had 3 children, Bea, Vincent, and John together. The family of 5 moved to New Zealand in 2004. Blessy loved living in Auckland as it allowed her to do the kind of things she loved, which included exploring, walking, and visiting new places. She had a job she enjoyed and great friends there. The children loved her too. Blessy had just celebrated her birthday with them on the 20th of May. She had lunch with the 3 children at a pub in Greenhithe and a family dinner that evening at Urban Turban in Wynyard Quarter. Her husband Antonio could not join them as he was on a work trip abroad. He was due to return on the 15th of June. Blessy couldn't wait to see him again. They were a very close family and were happiest when they were all together. That day, the 24th of May, Blessy left work at 7 p.m. She worked at Tower Insurance and was supposed to finish work at 5 p.m. that day, but she agreed to do a couple of extra hours overtime. Due to that, she had not arranged a ride home. A co-worker, Bahula Shah, collected Blessy that morning and gave her a ride to work, but as she finished at 5 p.m., she was gone before Blessy finished. There was a bus that stopped close to her home, though, and Blessy got the Birkenhead Transport's 973 bus from Lower Albert Street to Birkdale Road when she finished work. The bus stop was a 700-meter walk to her home. It should have taken her just 5 minutes to walk home. But Blessy never made it home that night. Blessy's daughter, Bea, was at work that night and got home at 3:15 a.m. the next morning. She noticed Blessy wasn't home and phoned her two brothers to ask if they knew where she was. They didn't. Bea began looking for her mother, and with the help of a Find My iPhone app, she found Blessy's phone on a grass verge in Salisbury Road, which was just 100 yards from their home, at 6 a.m. that morning. Around that same verge, she found Blessy's shoes and her Tupperware container that she used for her lunch, which she brought with her every day to work. When the police arrived, they initially thought they were dealing with a hit and run due to where Blessy's possessions were found and how they were scattered around the verge. Had she been struck by a vehicle and was now lost and disorientated somewhere? But it became apparent that something more sinister may have taken place. A young girl who lived on the street heard the sound of a woman scream around the same time Blessy got off the bus at the stop closest to her home. A BMW car was seen overtaking the bus Blessy was on, and that led police to question 28-year-old Tony Douglas Robertson. He told police that he had no idea who Blessy was or what happened to her. Police knew Tony well. He was a convicted sex offender and abductor and had been released from prison just 5 months earlier. He was subject to an extended supervision order, which included 24-hour GPS tracking, and he was being monitored at the time. He had a curfew and had to be home every night at 8 p.m. until 6 a.m. the next morning. Due to the GPS tracking device, which was an ankle bracelet, police were able to establish where he was around the time Blessy went missing. They discovered that he was on the street Blessy was on at around the same time. They also discovered that he spent time that day, the 24th of May, at Eskdale Cemetery and returned there the next day. That prompted police to search Eskdale Cemetery. With the help of a police dog, 2 days after Blessy went missing, her body was found under pine scrub in Eskdale Cemetery. Her body was covered with foliage and debris, and she was wrapped in a sheet. She had been raped and stabbed to death. Police arrested Tony, and he was charged with rape and murder. He pleaded not guilty. It was the prosecution case that Tony saw Blessy, who was a complete stranger to him, walking home as he was driving down Birkdale Street. It was their case that the evidence would show that he deliberately knocked her down, and as a result of that impact, her leg broke in 2 places. They believed that Tony got out of his car, picked Blessy up and put her in the back of his car, and drove back to his Birkdale apartment just before his 8 p.m. curfew kicked in. Due to that, no alarm was triggered as he was home at the time he was supposed to be home at. A witness testified that they saw Blessy get off the bus at Birkdale and walk away briskly. They saw a white sedan-like vehicle overtaking the bus before speeding down Salisbury Road. The court heard testimony from an 11-year-old girl. She testified that she lived on Salisbury Road with her family, and on the night of the 24th of May, she was cooking dumplings in the kitchen with her sister when she heard the sound of a car and a high-pitched scream at around 7:30 p.m. It was driving up the hill from Eskdale, and it stopped. Then I heard a high-pitched scream from a lady, and then there was nothing after that. The girl told the court that she then heard the car drive off in the direction of Birkdale Road. The court heard that it was the prosecution case that when Tony got back to his apartment, he parked his car in the garage beneath his home and raped Blessy. It was their case that he also strangled her and stabbed her in a frenzied and violent manner before slashing her throat. The jury heard that early the next morning, Tony wrapped Blessy's body in a bed sheet and put her body back in his car and drove her to the Eskdale Cemetery and dumped her body there. They believed that he waited until the next morning to bring Blessy's body to the cemetery so that his curfew would be finished. forensic scientist Ryan Keir Morgan Smith testified that luminol testing was carried out at the area where Blessie's body was found, and that revealed a bloody path where her body had most likely been dragged. He testified that the blood trail indicated that a blood-stained object had been pulled through the grass, and the evidence showed that it was likely Blessie's body was carried through some of the cemetery before being put on the ground and dragged to the place where her body was later found. The court heard about the injuries that Blessie sustained. Pathologist Dr. Carl Wigren testified. He told the court that Blessie had been stabbed multiple times and the stab wounds were deep, and one was so violent that the links of Blessie's necklace were found embedded in its depths. Dr. Wigren testified that when Blessie's throat was slashed, it severed her windpipe. He told the court that he was certain all of her injuries were inflicted on her when she was alive, as he found blood in her lungs. He testified that Blessie had so many injuries that it was difficult to say which one caused her death, but it was likely a combination of strangling and blunt force trauma that she suffered as a result of being struck by the car and the stab wounds and the incise wounds. I think it's difficult to attribute death to one singular injury, but if I were to make a guess, more probable than not guess, it was the stabbing that hastened the death. The court heard that Blessie had several blunt force trauma injuries, including broken ribs, broken legs, broken or missing teeth, and abrasions to her body, which were consistent with post-mortem dragging. The court heard that he believed that Blessie was strangled first, as a way to subdue her, and that the stabbing and incise wounds happened after. There was evidence of manual strangulation. There was bruising on her neck. She had a fractured thyroid and broken capillaries in her eyes. Dr. Wigren testified that Blessie could have survived being struck by the car if she had received medical help, but instead she received further injuries, which included sharp force injuries, and that caused her to bleed substantially. Essentially, she bled out. When asked if there were any defensive wounds on her body, Dr. Wigren told the court that there didn't appear to be, but he explained to the jury that that was not unusual in circumstances where a victim had died in such a violent manner. Dr. Wigren testified that a number of samples were taken from Blessie's body and sent for DNA testing, and Tony's sperm was found on her body. The court heard that as Tony was wearing a GPS anklet at the time, they could see that he was at the Eskdale Cemetery hours before the murder took place, and they believed he was there to find a spot where he could hide a body. Due to that, they argued that the murder was planned in advance. They believed he selected the place where he would hide his victim's body before he had even selected his victim. The prosecutor in the case, Kieran Raftery, said, "This was not you looking for drugs. This was for you already looking for possible locations to dump the body of the person you were going to rape." The same device showed he revisited the area early the following morning, and that was when the prosecution believed he dumped Blessie's body there. The Crown prosecutor, Michael Walker, highlighted why those two visits to the cemetery were important to the case. He told the jury that they showed the defendant was planning to kill someone, and that his trip to the cemetery was scoping out where to dump the body. The court heard that blood was found in Tony's car and a knife, and some of Blessie's belongings were found buried in the back of his property. Traces of Blessie's blood was found on the knife. The court heard that there was damage found on Tony's BMW. Detective Constable Shane Page testified that the BMW appeared to have been damaged recently. A majority of the rear passenger's seatbelt was missing. When I dismantled the seatbelt, being the anchorage point, there was about a meter, I think 940 millimeters, of the seatbelt was missing. It had been cut. He testified that there was further damage inside the car, which included cuts and scratches to the leather seating in the back of the car. He told the court that a sizable area of the foam inside the back seat had been replaced with a different foam and that there was blood on the passenger's seat and in the boot of the car. Auto glazier Michael Nelson testified that on the 26th of May, he was called to Tony's home to repair a broken BMW windscreen. He told the court that Tony told him that he needed the screen repaired as soon as possible. Michael noticed that the windscreen had already been removed from the car, which was unusual. He further observed that there was blood inside the car. Michael testified that he asked Tony what had caused the damage to the windscreen, and Tony told him that joking around with mates caused the glass to smash. He said that his friend slipped on the bonnet and crashed through the glass. Sergeant Blair Atkinson of the Serious Crash Unit testified that he believed Blessy was knocked down deliberately. He told the court that he believed that she was struck while she was walking on the pavement, and he based that belief on the fact a tire imprint was found on the verge near to where her belongings were found. It was the defense case that Tony caused Blessy's death, but that her death was not intentional and was in no way planned. It was their case that Tony accidentally knocked Blessy down that evening, and he panicked afterwards and inflicted all the injuries that were found on her body to make it look like a random attack. But he insisted that the injuries were inflicted after Blessy was already dead. During the case, Tony sacked his legal team and defended himself. He told the court that he denied the prosecution's version of events and said that he panicked after he hit Blessy accidentally. He told the court that the evidence would show that. He said that the only reason he put Blessy in his car and drove home was because of his curfew. I put her straight in my car to comply with my curfew that demanded I be there at 8 p.m. and stay there until 6 a.m. He said that the prosecution were wrong and the attack wasn't premeditated and that there were no witnesses to the car accident. He said that he was at the cemetery on the 24th and 25th of May because he was trying to buy drugs. In relation to the DNA evidence that was found, he argued that it was microscopic, and scientists had struggled to isolate and test. The court heard contrasting opinions from another pathologist in relation to the injuries that Blessy sustained. Dr. Chapman had reviewed Dr. Wigren's report and did not agree with him that Blessy had been strangled. A report by Dr. Chapman was read out in court, and in the report, he suggested that Blessy's neck injuries, in particular the fractured thyroid, could have been caused by another blow to that area. The report stated that the bruising on Blessy's neck didn't appear to be from fingertips. He also didn't agree that it was likely that she had inhaled her own blood after being stabbed. That would indicate that she wasn't alive at the time the stab wounds were made, which would align with Tony's version of events that he caused the stab wounds to make it look like a random attack after Blessy was already dead. Tony gave evidence. He told the court that when he put Blessy into his car, he thought she was already dead, and he said he tried to make her death look like a random attack because he was high on methamphetamine at the time. He also claimed he didn't rape Blessy. In relation to the DNA evidence, in the form of his semen that was found on Blessy's body, Tony told the court that that was not the result of rape, but instead was due to contamination and police malpractice. The jury didn't believe him. They found him guilty of rape and murder. Tony was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum non-parole period of 24 years and preventive detention for the rape. In New Zealand, Preventive detention is an open-ended jail term, which means that Tony can be imprisoned indefinitely or recalled at any time. He appealed on the basis that Blessie's death was accidental, and as that was the defense case, the jury should have been given the option to find him guilty of manslaughter instead. His appeal was rejected. He appealed to a higher court, the Supreme Court, and they ruled that he did not raise anything during the trial to suggest the alternative charge of manslaughter could have been reached. He was refused leave to appeal further. Tony was granted name suppression during the trial because of his previous convictions for child sexual offenses, and as a result, his criminal history was not revealed to the jury. It was only after Tony's sentence was handed down that the full details of his criminal past could be revealed. When he was just 18 years old, he kidnapped and molested a 5-year-old girl in Tauranga in 2005. A local officer acted on instinct and believed that Tony may be involved, set out to find him, and found him with the girl, and the girl's pants were down. He was found guilty of 7 charges, including indecently assaulting the girl and attempting to abduct 2 other children, and sentenced to 8 years in prison. Tony was released in December 2013, just 5 months before Blessie was murdered, and he breached the conditions of his release twice in a matter of weeks. Due to that, he was deemed a danger, and as such, an order was made stating that he had to be monitored for a decade and was required to wear a 24-hour GLS tracking anklet. That was the maximum period of an extended supervision order. The judge in that case, Justice Edwin Wiley, made the order due to the risk he posed. I am satisfied that Mr. Robertson poses a very considerable risk indeed. I consider that it is likely that he will commit an indecency on a child under the age of 12 years, and that he will abduct a child for the purpose of sexual connection. The evidence compels the conclusion that he is impulsive and that he is unable to control his anger and aggression. Mr. Robertson has a predilection for and a proclivity towards sexual offending. He has shown no remorse. Indeed, he continues to deny it. Despite that order being given before Blessie's murder, and despite the fact that Tony was wearing the GPS anklet and was being monitored at the time, it did not deter or indeed prevent him from the violent attack he inflicted on Blessie. The circumstances surrounding his release from prison, the order requiring him to be monitored and stating he was a risk, caused extra pain and anger for Blessie's family at a time of already unimaginable grief. He should have never had the opportunity to rape and murder her if he was being monitored. A government report was conducted, but it found there was no fault in the handling of Tony's case on the part of police or corrections, and that Tony alone was responsible for Blessie's death. They made 27 recommendations as to how management of high-risk offenders can be improved. Blessie's husband, Antonio, spoke to the media after the report was released and said that his family were disappointed and devastated by the inquiry's findings, and he believed that corrections do not have the capabilities to manage high-risk sex offenders. In fact, we think the offenders manage them. The Department of Corrections Minister, Judith Collins, said, Tony Robertson had served his full 8-year term in prison for his previous offense, the kidnap and molestation of a 5-year-old girl, having been denied parole on 3 occasions because of his lack of remorse. The residents of Birkdale, Auckland, were not told he had been released into their community. In a statement released by New Zealand police, Antonio said that Blessie is the light of our home, and without her, we will be lost in darkness. Right now, we are just trying to pretend that everything is okay, but deep inside, we are brokenhearted. We have been robbed. She is gone too soon. Case 8 It was the 22nd of June, 1980, a Sunday. Stephanie Mullen arrived home at around 4 a.m. She expected to find her 14-year-old sister, Suzanne Bombardier, asleep on the couch downstairs, but there was no sign of her. Stephanie assumed that she must have fallen asleep upstairs instead, with her two daughters, so she went straight to bed so as not to wake them. Stephanie had asked Suzanne to babysit her two girls, who were 5 and 6 years old, on the night of the 21st of June at Stephanie's Hudson Court apartment in Antioch, California, United States, and Suzanne agreed. It was the first day of summer, and Suzanne was looking forward to the months ahead. She had worked hard in school and made the honor roll for spring 1980. Stephanie knew that she could always rely on Suzanne. She was such a well-mannered, kind, and studious girl, and she adored her two nieces. At around noon on the 22nd of June, Stephanie got up to make a late breakfast for her daughters, and around the same time her mother called to ask if Suzanne was coming home. Stephanie asked her two daughters to check on Suzanne. They told her that she wasn't there and that she hadn't slept in their bedroom. Stephanie went to look for Suzanne herself, but she was nowhere to be found in the apartment. What happened to her? There was no sign that anything unusual had happened in the apartment, but nobody knew where Suzanne was, so the police were notified. Police tried to ascertain with some degree of certainty when Suzanne was last seen and when she was last at the apartment so they could start from there. Stephanie told police that the day before, the 21st of June, Stephanie was at work and she asked Suzanne to babysit that night so that she could go out to a co-worker's birthday party. As Stephanie had to go to the party straight from work, she asked Suzanne to drop off some clothes for her at the restaurant where she worked. Stephanie told police that Suzanne brought the clothes to the restaurant sometime between 7:30 p.m. and 8 p.m. the night of the 21st of June. She gave them to a co-worker as Stephanie was working, but Stephanie saw Suzanne across the street from the restaurant, and they waved at each other. Stephanie's two daughters told police that Suzanne was home with them after that, and looked after them that night, the night of the 21st of June, and she let them stay up late as a treat. They told police that Suzanne was wearing her nightgown and a red and white terry cloth bathrobe when they went to bed. Police discovered that Suzanne spoke to a friend on the phone at 1:30 a.m., and at that time, everything seemed fine with Suzanne. The friend told police that Suzanne told her that she was tired and was going to sleep. Stephanie got home at 4 a.m., so police believed that they were dealing with a 2.5-hour period between 1:30 a.m. and 4 a.m. as the timeline for when Suzanne went missing. There was no indication that Suzanne left the house to go anywhere herself, like a party of some sort, or that she may have run away. The overnight bag with her belongings inside that she brought with her to Stephanie's apartment was still at the apartment. Her shoes were still there, too. Her family were adamant she would not have left the two girls behind unattended unless she had no choice in the matter. None of her clothes, money, or belongings were missing from Stephanie's apartment or from her own home, where she lived with her mother and stepfather. Due to that, police wondered whether she had been kidnapped. Her father, Ted, told police that she must have known the person and let them inside, as there was no sign of any forced entry. There were no signs of a struggle either. Police believed that foul play was involved due to the unusual circumstances surrounding her disappearance, and they didn't rule out the possibility that she was kidnapped. Police had very little leads at that point, as the girls who were asleep in the apartment at the time didn't hear anything unusual, and none of the neighbors reported hearing or seeing any disturbance of any sort. A search began. 5 days later, around 97 miles from Stephanie's apartment, a fisherman found Suzanne's nude body floating in the San Joaquin River near the Antioch Bridge. Police confirmed her body had been in the water for several days before she was found. She'd been stabbed in the chest and died as a result of a single stab wound to the heart. There was evidence found that indicated Suzanne had been sexually assaulted, and DNA was obtained from her body, but testing was not as advanced then as it is now, so no match was found, but the evidence was retained and was stored on the police file. In the years that followed, there were many suspects, but police didn't have enough evidence to arrest or charge anyone. For almost 4 decades, the circumstances surrounding Suzanne's murder remained a mystery. In 2015, biological evidence was submitted to the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office Forensic Laboratory, which is equipped to conduct some of the most advanced DNA testing. 2 years later, police discovered that a DNA match had been found. The match identified a man named Mitchell Lynn Bacon. Mitchell was known to the police. Aside from having a lengthy criminal record and being a convicted sexual offender, he was a suspect in the case after Suzanne's body was found. Police spoke to him in 1980, shortly after Suzanne's body was found, and he told them that he had an alibi. He claimed he wasn't near the Hudson Court apartment around the time that Suzanne went missing, and he was at the Sand Hill Bar between Brentwood and Oakley with his aunt. He told police that he left there around 2 a.m. and went to a store at the intersection of Lone Tree Road and Highway 4 before heading home for the night. Mitchell was initially named as a suspect at the time because Suzanne's sister Stephanie knew him. She told police that she met him when she was on a date with another man. Even though he saw her with another man, he asked her out. She agreed and went on 3 dates with him. After going on the 3 dates, she realized that she didn't want to see him again, as she found him boring, but Mitchell didn't see things that way. He showed up at the restaurant where she worked and would just sit there and stare at her. He was described as being fixated on her. Mitchell told her that he found a house for them to live in, and when she stopped all contact with him, he left multiple messages for her at the restaurant and at her home. He later showed up at her apartment too, and she discovered that a co-worker had given him her home address. In 1980, he agreed to take a polygraph test when asked by the police, and even though the results were recorded as being inconclusive, he was cleared as the suspect. But 37 years later, and due to the DNA match, Mitchell was arrested and charged with murder, kidnapping, rape, and oral copulation. Mitchell is currently awaiting trial. The Contra Costa District Attorney's Office has not yet made a determination whether to seek the death penalty or to pursue a sentence of life without parole. Mitchell has not entered a plea yet. While the trial has not taken place yet, attorneys on both sides have given an indication as to what their cases will be like. The prosecutor in the case, Mary Knox, believes that Mitchell went to Stephanie's apartment and somehow gained access and threatened Suzanne. The prosecution believe, based on everything they know about Suzanne and statements made about her by her family, that there is no way she would have left the apartment, leaving behind the 2 young girls inside alone, unless she had no option in the matter. The prosecution believe that Mitchell used a 5.5-inch long knife to threaten Suzanne with and force her to leave the apartment to go to a second location. They believe that he raped, stabbed her through the heart, and then dumped Suzanne's body in the river. The injuries show that Suzanne was stabbed once, but it was with such force that it went through her body. Mary said that the evidence suggested that Mitchell killed Suzanne during the rape itself. Her death happened in very close proximity to the time Mr. Bacon's DNA was deposited into Bombardier's mouth. Think of the amount of force you'd have to use to drive a knife through someone's body. Mitchell's lawyer, Cynthia Schofield, also gave an indication of the type of defense that they may use. She admitted that there was probably sexual contact between her client and Suzanne, and that part could not be argued due to the DNA found, but that sexual contact may have occurred after Suzanne's death. She claimed that it was possible her client had sex with Suzanne after she was already dead, and that the DNA found just indicated that sexual contact took place. It didn't indicate that he was responsible for her rape and murder. She raised the possibility that necrophilia as a defense may be used. We have no evidence the sexual act was prior to death. We cannot assume that. She also pointed to her belief that there was no evidence found that a kidnapping had even taken place. Police confirmed at the time that there were no signs of a struggle or forced entry at Stephanie's apartment. She believes that the prosecution's case amounts to unanswered questions and a lot of speculation. Prior to his arrest on charges relating to Suzanne's death, Mitchell spent time in prison already. He was arrested in Mountain View in Silicon Valley for rape, robbery, assault, with intent to commit murder and oral copulation in 1973. A year later, he was convicted of first and second-degree burglary, assault with intent to murder, and sodomy. He was sentenced to 5 years to life in prison. After he was released from prison, he was arrested for robbery and rape in Ileton and convicted of first-degree burglary, robbery, rape, and sodomy. He was sentenced to 24 years in prison. In 2002, he was convicted in Contra Costa County of failing to properly register as a sex offender and was sentenced to 4 years in prison. His crimes included tying ropes around a woman during the rape and sexually assaulting another woman with a cigarette. It was reported that he also stabbed her while humming a song to himself. In relation to the charges he faces for Suzanne's murder, he is next due in court in March 2022. Case 9. It was the 11th of October 2015, a Sunday. That afternoon, 18-year-old Zoe Hastings left her house in Dallas, Texas, United States, to go to Bible study. She told her parents, Jim and Cheryl, that she would be home after Bible study for dinner. Zoe graduated in May 2015 and was preparing to go on a mission trip for her church in November. Zoe was excited about the trip, and she wanted to make sure to attend that Bible study class, as it included preparations and instructions for the trip. Zoe left the house after 4:30 p.m. to head to the class at the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It was due to begin at 5 p.m. She left in the family minivan. Her parents expected her home around 6:30 p.m. At 6:30 p.m., there was no sign of Zoe, and her parents were worried about her, as it was very out of character for her not to be at the family dinner. She loved sitting down for dinner with her parents and her 3 younger sisters and 1 younger brother. Thinking that she may just have been delayed, they sent her text messages. When they received no reply, they called her multiple times, but there was no answer. They reached out to friends to see if anyone knew where she was, but nobody saw her. In fact, her family discovered that Zoe did not attend the 5 p.m. Bible study class. Zoe's parents called police at 10 p.m., but by midnight, the police had not arrived at their house, so they went ahead and filed a missing persons report and continued looking for her themselves. A few hours later, in the early hours of the Monday morning, her parents realized that Zoe had a Find My iPhone app installed on her phone. They managed to figure out where her phone was from that. It was at a nearby creek, which was just a 5-minute drive from her home. Zoe's parents went straight there, but by the time they got there were already people there. They saw lights, police tape, and paramedics. They were informed a vehicle had been involved in a crash. The minivan that Zoe was driving was found crashed in the creek. It was nose down in the creek bed, almost in a vertical position. Police were there on foot of a call made by a member of the public. A man, Kurt Arnhem, was out walking his dog and observed a man running towards him. The man told him that there was a crash and a car and a girl were down in the creek near the intersection Easton Road and Lippett Avenue. Kurt went down to the creek with the man, and the man told Kurt that the girl was dead. Kurt called 911. The other man left the scene before police arrived. When asked what the man was like, Kurt told police he was visibly shaken. Police went down to the creek and found the girl. It was Zoe. She was lying face down in a pool of blood and was around 10 to 20 feet from the driver's door of the minivan. Zoe's parents were informed that Zoe was dead, but police notified them that their daughter had not died due to injuries sustained from the crash. Her death was the result of homicidal violence. Zoe's dress was pulled up above her waist. Her underwear was rolled down to her mid-thighs. Police believed that she had been sexually assaulted. Her throat was cut multiple times. Police searched the area. The doors, with the exception of the driver's door of the minivan, were all locked. They found a knife that was covered in blood at the top of the embankment, and police believed that that was the knife used to cut Zoe's neck. Zoe's phone gave police a timeline to work with. Her phone was at the creek, and location services data on the phone revealed it was there from 5:01 p.m. on the Sunday evening and remained there until the Monday morning when Zoe's body was found. During the course of their investigation, police discovered that after Zoe left her house, she stopped at Walgreens on Garland Road to return a Redbox movie on her way to the Bible study. The Walgreens was so close to her house that she could see her house from the car park. She dropped the movie back at 4:42 p.m. So what happened to her after that, and why didn't she make it to the church for 5 p.m.? 2 witnesses came forward. They told police that they observed a woman at a minivan in the car park outside Walgreens. One of the men claimed he saw an African-American man rapidly approach her, and they both got into the minivan and drove off. He told police that the man was driving the minivan. The second man told police that he saw the man approach the woman, and it looked like he had something in his hand. The man said something to her, and they both got into the minivan, and the man drove off at speed. DNA was obtained from the knife found at the creek, and police got a match. It was matched to a man whose DNA was already in the database. His name was Antonio Cochran. Antonio denied any involvement, but due to the DNA results and the accounts given to police from the witnesses, he was charged with capital murder based on the murder of Zoe in the course of committing or attempting to commit a kidnapping. Major Max Giron of the Dallas Police Department described Antonio as obviously a sexual predator that's been taken off the streets. Police believed that it was a random attack and that he did not know Zoe prior to the abduction. When his trial began, he pleaded not guilty. It was the prosecution case that Zoe left her home that Sunday afternoon to go to Bible study. And on the way, she stopped off at the Walgreens across the street from her house to drop a Redbox movie back. The court heard that the prosecution believed that Zoe was abducted from the car park there just as she was about to get into the minivan. That belief was corroborated by 2 witness accounts, and those witnesses were present in court to give testimony. The first witness, Lester Lee Clark, testified that he worked as a tattoo artist at a tattoo parlor located near the intersection of Garland Road and Peavy Road in East Dallas, and was walking towards the Walgreens store at around 4:45 p.m. to buy a pack of cigarettes. He told the jury that he saw a woman who was either returning a movie or getting one from the Redbox kiosk, walking back towards a minivan. He observed that as she was about to get in, a short, heavy-set African-American male approached her. He was moving fast and grabbed the car door. He noticed that he had what he described as a kind of animated conversation with Zoe. Lester testified that he could not hear what they were talking about, but that it lasted no more than 5 seconds, and the woman, who was at the driver's door, got in and moved across to the passenger side. The man got in and drove off. When asked why he didn't get help, He told the court that he thought they were boyfriend and girlfriend. The second witness, a man named Gary Whitman, testified. The court heard that he was homeless at the time and was across the street from the Walgreens at around 4:45 p.m. that Sunday afternoon. He testified that he saw a stout, heavy-set African-American man, about 5 feet and 8 or 9 inches in height, walk up to a woman who was at a minivan in the car park at the Walgreens store. He described his walk for the court, and the jury heard that he was walking aggressively in a sneaky way. He believed that he was trying not to cause too much attention. Gary testified that the man approached the woman from behind as she was trying to get into the minivan. He told the court that the man put his arms out to stop her from getting away, and he believed he took something from his pocket, but he couldn't see what it was. He saw them both get into the minivan and testified that the man drove off in the minivan. The court heard that Gary tried to get help. As he had no access to a phone, he asked an employee at a convenience store to call 911. The prosecution told the jury that they believed that the man the two men saw was Antonio, and that they had further evidence, DNA evidence, to prove same. The court heard that multiple hairs were collected from the crime scene and examined, and that DNA analysis determined that Antonio's mitochondrial DNA profile could not be excluded from a hair found in Zoe's left hand. Gloria Jean Dimmick, a mitochondrial DNA analyst, testified that mitochondrial DNA is not a unique identifier. It cannot identify a particular individual, but it can be used to exclude people. It was the prosecution case that after Antonio abducted Zoe, he drove to the nearby creek, sexually assaulted her, and killed her there. The jury heard the knife was found at the creek, and Antonio's DNA was on the handle of the knife, and the knife was covered in Zoe's blood. Zoe's mother, Cheryl, testified. She told the jury that when they traced Zoe's phone to the creek, they went straight there and saw the police, and they instantly knew that something was not right. As we drove up, you could see emergency lights. They gave us the horrible news that she had passed. She testified that after her own daughter was raped and murdered, she became a sex assault trauma nurse. The court heard that cell phone data placed Antonio at the scene. Prior to Zoe's abduction, Antonio sent a number of text messages to various people. At 1:48 a.m. on the Sunday, he sent a text to Gillis Pina, his housemate, and said that he was moving out of the house. At 2:07 p.m., he sent a text message to Angie Simon, his ex-girlfriend, and told her that Rena, who had been like a mother to him, had died the day before. He sent text messages at 2:25 p.m. and 3:19 p.m. to Mimi and told her he had been driving, drinking, and crying. No text messages were sent between 3:19 p.m. and 9:30 p.m. on the Sunday. At 4:34 p.m., Antonio's cell phone communicated with a particular transceiver on a radio tower in Dallas, and the area covered by it included the Walgreens store. Just after 9:30 p.m. on the Sunday night, Antonio sent a text message to Frank Torres, Gillis Pina's brother. "I really need you, bro. I don't know what to, I'm not well. Frank to him, much has happened. I need you, bro." The court heard that Antonio started at a new job as a checker at a Fiesta Mart grocery store just 2 days before Zoe's murder. He was scheduled to work the day after Zoe's death, but he did not show up for that shift. That night, he sent a text message at 9:35 p.m. to Angie Simon. "No, I was for you, and my life is over. I'll find out soon enough. Siestico." The court also heard about web searches that had been carried out on Antonio's phone between the 13th of October and the 23rd of October, which was the day before he was arrested. He searched for local news and crime 32 times, and 5 related to Zoe's death. Prior to that timeline, In the 30 days before that, he looked up news only once, and it was a Daily Mail article about gang crime. The court heard about Zoe's injuries and the cuts to her neck. She was stabbed 6 times. But the testimony in relation to sexual assault by the medical examiner, Dallas County's chief medical examiner, Dr. Jeffrey Barnard, came as a surprise to many when he testified that he found no evidence of trauma that would suggest sexual assault. It was the defense case that the prosecution and the police targeted the wrong man based on weak DNA evidence and unreliable witness testimony. They told the jury that at the time of Zoe's murder, Antonio was helping a friend. Defense attorney Paul Johnson cast doubt on the testimony given by the 2 witnesses who testified they saw Zoe's abduction. Paul challenged Lester on his testimony, questioning whether he was correct with the timeline he gave and with the description of the man he provided to the police. Paul told the court that the other witness, Gary, had a criminal history and could not be trusted. The court heard about his drug use, and Paul questioned how he would have seen anything at all if he was across the street. Gary accepted he didn't see the man's face, but claimed he came forward as it was the right thing to do, even though it had consequences for him. There was an active warrant for his arrest, and Gary was taken into custody after he testified in court. The defense also questioned the DNA evidence. They conceded that Antonio's DNA was on the handle of the knife, but they claimed that it was on it before it was used to murder Zoe. Antonio was identified as a suspect when the DNA found on the handle of the knife was compared to DNA of several suspects on the system. The court heard it was touch or handler DNA that was found. That can occur when something is touched and the person who touched it leaves behind their DNA on it. Testing revealed that the DNA from the knife handle matched Antonio's DNA. But the defense argued that his DNA may have already been on the handle from an earlier date, as he may have handled the knife while he was working at a local movie theater. Items such as knives were sometimes found there, and Antonio may have found it and touched it, and then another person may have later used that same knife to kill Zoe and somehow manage not to leave their own DNA on it. The defense reminded the jury that no fingerprints were found on or inside the minivan. If he grabbed the door, as the witnesses claimed, then why was there no fingerprints on it? He also referred to the evidence given by the medical examiner that there was no evidence of sexual assault found. Antonio was not charged with sexual assault. Paul believed the sexual assault was referred to inflame the jury. Paul urged the jury to find Antonio not guilty. I know this case is going to stay with you for a long time. The popular thing to do today would be to go back there and convict. I'm going to ask you to do the thing you told me you would do. Make the hard decision, do what is right, and return a verdict of not guilty. The prosecution disagreed and asked the jury to find him guilty. The jury deliberated for nearly 23 hours over several days. During that time, they asked the judge for further details/clarification. Re 3 points. They asked to see a picture of the Walgreens store where Zoe was last seen. They asked about mitochondrial DNA, and they asked about the time frame of police interviews with the 2 men who testified that they saw a man fitting Antonio's description with Zoe at her minivan. The jury found Antonio guilty of the lesser included offense of murder instead of capital murder. It took them just 6 minutes to decide his sentence. Antonio was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole and a $10,000 fine. Zoe's family issued a statement after her death. We are devastated at the loss of our daughter Zoe. Today, we express our gratitude to local law enforcement, officials, and loved ones helping our family. Our Zoe was full of life and love and light. She was full of talent. She was happy and joyful. She is loved by her parents and her siblings. She loved the Lord, Jesus Christ, and loved serving others. She was planning to serve a mission, to share this message of the Savior's love with others. It pains us to know that her life has been taken, yet we feel comfort in knowing that our family is forever and we will be together again someday. We are grateful for the privacy and respect given to us during this extremely difficult time. Please continue to pray for our family. We appreciate and need your support. After the trial, it was revealed that it was not Antonio's first conviction. Antonio had a history of arrests and convictions, including assault, theft, and burglary. In February 2014, he was arrested in Bowie County, Texas. He was accused of raping a teenage girl in a car, and the case was sent forward for trial. A 17-year-old girl testified at that trial that Antonio had been in a relationship with her mother, and he offered to give her a ride on the 12th of February, 2014. She told the court he threatened to kill her in the car and drove to a wooded area and then sexually assaulted her. During the assault, residents who lived nearby approached the car with flashlights. They had been on alert due to a number of burglaries in the area. They called 911. Antonio was arrested. At his trial for that case, which took place in January 2015, the defense claimed the sex was consensual. He was found not guilty. Case 10. It was the 10th of February 2013, a Sunday. Jessica Nelson worked with 25-year-old Tasha Lucia and was concerned when she could not get in touch with her. She called her multiple times, but there was no answer. They worked together at Locklear's Beach City Grill on Folly Beach, and Tasha did not show up for her shift that day. And Jessica tried to get in touch with her all day to no avail. Jessica had a gut feeling that something was wrong, and it was a feeling she couldn't shake. So, along with another colleague, the two women went to Tasha's home at 5 p.m. that afternoon. Tasha didn't live alone. She lived with her boyfriend, Robert Tillman Kronsberg, in James Island, Charleston County, South Carolina, United States. When Jessica and her colleague arrived at Tasha's home, they knocked on the door several times. There was no answer. They noticed that the front living room window was open, so they climbed inside. They immediately noticed that Robert was home as they heard loud snores coming from one of the bedrooms, and when they looked inside, Robert was asleep on the bed. They woke him and asked where Tasha was, but they did not understand what he said. It was just unintelligible mumbling. The words he was saying didn't make sense, so they searched the home, looking for Tasha, and found her lying on a bed in another bedroom. When they lifted up the sheet that was over her, they saw a large knife sticking out of her chest. Tasha was dead. The two women were so frightened that they ran outside screaming and called 911. Some of Tasha's friends saw bruises on her before, and some were aware that Robert would hurt her, but they never believed he would kill her. They knew they had a volatile and toxic relationship and would fight, break up, but then get back together again. Police arrested Robert. They announced that they weren't looking for anyone else based on evidence found and admissions made. They charged him with murder and possession of a weapon during a violent crime. Robert pleaded not guilty. It was the prosecution case that Robert, who had a Facebook cover photo of the bloody chainsaw scene from American Psycho, had an on-off relationship with Tasha, and they would often argue, and that on the 10th of February, 2013, one of those arguments tragically resulted in Tasha's death. It was their case that the day before Tasha's death, the 9th of February, Tasha met up with friends. The court heard that Tasha spent time with friends on Folly Beach having fun, and the jury were shown pictures of a smiling Tasha that were taken just hours before her death. Robert was at work that day and went to a party afterwards. But the prosecution told the jury that didn't stop him trying to create an argument with Tasha via text messages. The prosecution told the court that Tasha's demeanor changed when she received a text from Robert. The jury heard that the argument escalated when they both got home. See, the defendant was angry. When Tasha got home, he and Tasha argued about her ex-boyfriend, and you will hear in his own words what he did to the person he supposedly cared about. Now, the prosecution told the jury that the fight turned physical. He hit her really hard. He hit her because she was yelling for help. So what was his solution to that problem? He started strangling her because she wouldn't be quiet. The prosecution believed that Tasha was killed sometime between midnight and 2 a.m. on the 10th of February. The jury heard testimony from Charleston Police Department Detective Richard Holmes, who told the court that Robert and Tasha argued about her ex-boyfriend and sex. That resulted in him strangling her. But he didn't stop there. After he strangled her, he was in the room and heard her gasping for air. He went in the kitchen and got a butcher knife and came back and stabbed her multiple times. Now the court heard that Tasha was choked, hit in the head with a hammer because she was screaming, and then strangled again. At that point, she wasn't dead, so Robert went into the kitchen, got a butcher knife, and stabbed her 15 times with it. The knife was still in her chest when her colleagues found her. The court heard that when police arrived, Robert was in bed, and when they woke him, he sat upright with wild eyes. They could not make out what he was saying, as it just sounded like he was mumbling. Police found a bottle of vodka, marijuana, ibuprofen, and a knife on the bedside table next to the bed that he was sleeping on. Robert was covered in blood when police found him, and he had what appeared to be self-inflicted cuts on his wrists. There was a 3-inch vertical laceration to his left wrist. Robert claimed that he had tried to take his own life twice, but it didn't work. The court heard that when Robert was taken to the hospital for treatment, he made certain admissions, including that he had taken cocaine. Detectives testified that he told them that he took sleeping pills, aspirin, drank alcohol, and tried to slit his own wrists. The prosecution played an audio tape for the jury, which they told the jury was a confession that Robert made. It was recorded when Robert was in hospital. In the recording, Robert can be heard saying that he grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed Tasha and tried to kill himself. The court heard testimony from one of Robert's friends, a man named Paul Polensky. Paul agreed to testify on behalf of the prosecution. The court heard that they were good friends and both worked together at a James Island pizza restaurant. He testified that in the early hours of that 10th of February morning, just after Tasha was murdered, he received a text from Robert's phone that had 911 written 4 times. Paul called him and testified that Robert asked him not to talk to him on the cell phone and to call him back from the landline at work instead. Paul did, and Robert said, "Don't freak out, but I just killed my girlfriend." Paul testified that he had been friends with Robert for a long time, and he even helped Robert get a job, so when he heard that, he thought that Robert was just joking. He had worked with him the evening before, and he was aware that Robert went to a party after work, so he didn't take it seriously at first, as he presumed Robert was drunk. But he soon realized that it wasn't a joke. Paul had been aware that Robert was arguing with Tasha that night, but did not realize the extent of it until Robert outlined what he did. Paul testified that Robert told him that he hit Tasha, and she began screaming, and he tried to choke her to make her stop. Robert told Tasha he would let her up if she stopped screaming. Paul testified that Robert did that 3 times, but she wouldn't stop screaming, so he grabbed the closest object that was next to him. That object happened to be a hammer, and he used it to hit her in the head with it. When asked if he called the police, Paul confirmed that he did not, as Robert assured him he would turn himself in the next day. The court heard testimony from the forensic pathologist, Dr. Susan Presnell, and she testified that the manner of Tasha's death was homicide, and the jury were shown pictures that were taken during the autopsy. The pictures showed Tasha with a black eye, a smashed nose, and multiple cuts and bruises to her face, lip, and neck. Some of the blows were consistent with being caused by a hammer. Tasha was also stabbed multiple times in the chest. The court heard that Tasha's blood was found on the hammer found in the house. The prosecutor, Chad Simpson, told the jury that there should be no doubt that Robert was guilty, and finding him guilty was an easy decision for them to make. The prosecutor asked the jury to consider that if it wasn't murder, then what was it? The defense told the jury that Robert caused Tasha's death, and that part wasn't in dispute. Robert's attorney, Charles Cochran, argued, "This case is going to be about what was going on in his heart that night. And that's what you're going to have to decide throughout the course of this week." It was the defense case that Robert killed Tasha, but it was in the heat of passion during an argument. The defense admitted Robert and Tasha argued about Tasha's ex-boyfriend, but that her death wasn't murder. It was a spontaneous crime of passion. The defense urged the jury to focus on fact and fact alone, and not to let emotion get in the way. Charles told the jury that this wasn't a case where somebody, namely his client, gets away with something, but rather they are charged for the correct crime. He said that in this case, Robert was out of control, and it was not an act of malice. This was all done in a frenzy, an uncontrolled frenzy with alcohol. A frenzy without the benefit of collecting one's thought. If Robert wasn't intoxicated, he would not have killed Tasha. He had no control over his own actions that night. The judge told the jury that while Robert was charged with murder and they could find him guilty of that charge, they could also consider the charge of voluntary manslaughter and find him guilty of that lesser charge if they saw fit based on the evidence they heard. The jury deliberated for just over an hour and found Robert guilty of murder and guilty of possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime. Robert began cursing at that point in the courtroom and had to be removed so that he could calm down. When he returned, he addressed Tasha's mother, Kimberly, and said, "I'm so sorry that I took her away from you." Robert's attorney asked the judge to sentence him to 35 years plus 5 years parole, as it was his first felony. Before Judge Roger Young handed down his sentence, the court heard from Robert's family. They told the judge that Robert was a troubled man and had struggled with substance abuse for many years. His addiction had robbed him of his childhood, his opportunity, his daughter, his loved ones, and now his freedom. The judge rejected the defense plea for 35 years. He did not believe it was a crime of passion and spoke directly to Robert. He said that one thing made it clear that it was not some spontaneous act. You thought she was dead and walked away from her, heard that she was still alive and went back to finish her off. He went back and stabbed her, and he didn't just stab her once, he stabbed her 15 times. Robert was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. On the 6th of December 2017, Robert Kronsberg was found dead in his cell at the Broad River Correctional Institution in Columbia. He took his own life